So back in 1513, there was this really frustrated diplomat who wrote a job application that was just so incredibly scandalous.
Yeah, literally so scandalous that the Pope eventually banned it.
Right, exactly. The Pope banned it. And his core argument, the author's argument, I mean, was that striving to be a perfectly, good person mathematically guarantees your own destruction.
Which is just a wild premise for a resume, honestly.
It really is. And, if you're listening to this deep dive right now, you've probably faced this exact friction in your own life.
Oh, for sure. Everyone has.
Right, because you follow standard operating procedure, you play fair, you wait your turn in line, and then you just watch someone who seamlessly bends the rules get the promotion or win the contract or seize power.
It's incredibly frustrating. And the text we're looking at today, it's not interested in comforting you about that frustration, is it?
Not at all. It is entirely focused on explaining the cold, mechanical reality of why that happens, and more importantly, how to actually survive it.
It forces a complete paradigm shift, I think, because we are all raised on these very clear, very comforting moral absolutes.
Yeah, the classic playbook.
Exactly. The playbook that says, always be honest, always be kind, always share. But then we step into a complex environment, like a competitive corporate hierarchy or a fraught political landscape.
Or just a really volatile market.
Right. And we discovered that virtue, at least how it was strictly taught to us, can suddenly become this massive liability.
Which is exactly what we were jumping into today.
Yeah.
We are exploring a brief, just incredibly dense and completely paradigm-shifting historical excerpt. It's titled Chapter 15 of Those Things for Which Men, and especially Princes, Are Praised or Blamed.
It's quite a title.
It is. And our mission for this deep dive is to basically strip away all those romanticized utopian ideas of leadership that we usually cling to.
We really have to leave them at the door.
Exactly. We are going to explore the brutal, pragmatic, and highly controversial concept that the author calls the effectual truth of power dynamics. And we're relying strictly on what is presented in this text today.
And to do that effectively, we kind of have to establish some ground rules for this analysis.
Ground rules are important here.
Yeah, because this text requires us and you listening to temporarily just, suspend our traditional moral judgments.
Just put them in a box.
Put them in a box, slide that box across the desk for the next hour. Because what we're analyzing here is a purely functional view of human behavior.
Right, it's like a mechanical breakdown.
Yes, a breakdown of how power is acquired, maintained, and lost in a world where, quite simply, not everyone is playing by the rules.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the author doesn't just start, throwing philosophical bombs immediately. They start at the very beginning of the excerpt with what feels like, almost like an apology.
Or at least a deep acknowledgement of the intellectual crime they're about to commit.
Yeah, exactly. They begin by stating their intent to examine the, quote, modes in government of a prince with subjects and with friends.
Which sounds standard enough.
Right, until the very next line, where they immediately confess a fear. They write that they fear being viewed as presumptuous because they are actively choosing to depart from the orders of others who have written on this topic before.
What's fascinating here is the author's profound situational awareness. I mean, they are stepping into a centuries-old conversation about leadership and statecraft.
A very crowded, very opinionated room.
Very crowded. And for generations, the orders of others, basically the established tradition of writing about leadership, was overwhelmingly moralistic.
Right, like a genre dedicated to describing the perfect virtuous ruler.
Exactly. And the author knows that coming in and tearing down that entire established framework is going to be viewed as deeply arrogant.
Hence the word presumptuous.
Right. The word presumptuous is chosen so carefully. It implies, overstepping one's bounds, actively challenging the intellectual and moral authorities of the era.
I was thinking about this, and it's basically the equivalent of a rogue economist standing up at, a prestigious global summit.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
Right. Everyone before them has given these lofty speeches about synergy and global harmony and corporate social responsibility. This person just walks up to the microphone, adjusts it, and says, forget every inspirational leadership book you've ever read. They are functionally useless.
I'm going to tell you how to actually survive the corporate Shark Tank.
Yes, exactly. But my question is, why does the author feel the need to explicitly flag this departure? Why not just state their case and move on?
Because they have to justify the destruction of the old rules. And that justification, it arrives in the very next breath in the text.
Okay, let's hear it.
The author writes, "But since my intent is to write something useful to whoever understands it."
Oh, wow.
Yeah. That phrase is the pivot point on which this entire philosophy turns. The author is declaring that utility practical, real-world usefulness is a higher priority than tradition or politeness or accepted morality.
They're essentially saying, I could write you another pleasant fantasy, but it won't actually keep you alive.
Right. It won't keep you alive when your enemies arrive at the gates.
That focus on utility feels incredibly sharp. And the specific phrasing you mentioned, useful to whoever understands it, that immediately caught my attention when I was reading.
Why is that?
Well, it suggests this isn't meant for mass consumption. It feels coded, like it's a specialized manual for those willing to confront uncomfortable realities rather than just some broad manifesto for the general public.
Absolutely. Whoever understands it acts as this philosophical filter. It implies an audience that already possesses a certain pragmatic maturity.
Like they've been around the block a few times.
Exactly. It's directed at someone who has already experienced that bitter friction between how things are supposed to work in theory and how they actually work in practice.
Right, because if you're entirely sheltered, you just won't get it.
No. If your worldview shatters the moment human beings act selfishly, you won't understand the utility of this text. You'll simply be repulsed by it.
Yeah, you just think it's evil.
Right. The author is speaking directly to the pragmatic survivor, the individual who has recognized that the established roles are often weaponized by those who secretly ignore them.
Wow. Weaponized by those who secretly ignore them.
Oh, yeah.
That's heavy. But, accepting that human nature is fundamentally self-interested, that creates a massive logistical problem for a leader, doesn't it?
Oh, a massive one.
Because if everyone is cheating, how does the leader actually govern without being completely destroyed by the very system they're trying to control?
And that question brings us right to the core philosophical split that defines this entire piece.
Okay, let's get into it.
Having justified why they are breaking the rules, the author drops what I think is the most defining concept in the whole text.
The big one.
The big one. They declare that it is, quote, more fitting to go directly to the effectual truth of the thing than to the imagination of it.
The effectual truth?
Yes. And they immediately attack the previous thinkers, stating, and many have imagined republics and principalities that have never been seen or known to exist in truth.
This is such an uncrossable line in the sand. I mean, the author is completely severing ties with prescriptive morality, right?
Yes, entirely. The idea of describing the world as it ought to be is thrown out the window.
And they're aggressively anchoring their philosophy in descriptive reality, describing the world strictly as it is.
Exactly.
Let's try to ground this imagined versus effectual divide with a high-stakes analogy, because I think it helps clarify things.
Go for it.
Think about a nation's economy that's based entirely on a fiat currency, paper money.
Okay, paper money.
The imagined republic in this scenario is the belief that this paper has inherent magical value just because the government says so. And, it works pretty smoothly as long as everyone mutually agrees to the illusion.
Right, as long as everyone plays along.
But the effectual truth of that system is revealed the second a massive crisis hits and people panic, because suddenly the illusion evaporates and people only value hard assets, tangible goods, survival resources.
So that's a really stark way to look at it.
Right. And I feel like the author is arguing that the philosophers before him have been trying to govern based on the illusion of the paper money. They're completely ignoring the fact that human nature operates on the brutal intrinsic value of self-interest.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of leadership, governing based on an imagined republic is not merely naive. It is literally catastrophic.
Catastrophic, yeah.
Because if you design your laws, your defenses, and your treaties on the assumption that other leaders will act rationally and benevolently,
Which they rarely do.
exactly,
Let's
your
just-
state will collapse the very moment it collides with the effectual truth of a neighboring ruler's greed or ambition.
Wow. So intentions just go out the window.
Totally out the window. The author demands that we judge strategies, alliances, and policies solely by their tangible effects in the physical world.
Intentions do not matter.
Moral purity does not matter. The only thing that matters is the effectual truth of the outcome.
Wait, I have to challenge this framing a little bit, though. Is it really just naive philosophers who are guilty of this? Because, aren't we all constantly operating in our own imagined republics?
What do you mean?
Well, we trust people because we feel they should be trustworthy. We assume a contract is going to be honored because it ought to be honored. The author seems intensely hostile toward the human imagination. Why is the imagination so dangerous in this context?
Because the imagination provides a false sense of security.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, the imagination of it is highly comforting. It creates this neat, orderly universe where good is rewarded and evil is punished.
Like a fairy tale.
Exactly like a fairy tale. But when a leader relies on that comfort, they stop analyzing the actual threat landscape. They become complacent.
They stop looking over their shoulder.
Right. The author's hostility toward the imagination stems from the belief that illusions get people killed. If a leader prefers the comforting imagination of a peaceful border to the harsh, effectual truth of an enemy amassing troops, well, that leader will be conquered.
So the imagination is basically a blindfold.
It is a blindfold, and a leader cannot afford to be blind.
So the blindfold comes off, and what we see is honestly terrifying. Because the text takes this concept of effectual truth and points it directly at the individual soul of the leader.
It gets very personal.
Very personal. And the conclusion is so stark, it practically leaves a bruise. The author writes, and this is a heavy quote, "For it is so far from how one lives to how one should live, that he who lets go of what is done for what should be done learns his ruin rather than his preservation."
Notice the mechanics of that phrasing right there. Learns his ruin.
Learns his ruin, yeah.
Ruin is not presented here as an accident or like a stroke of bad luck. It is the direct educational outcome of focusing on what should be done.
Like it's an inevitable lesson you're going to learn the hard way.
Precisely.
And then comes the absolute knockout punch of the excerpt. I mean, this is the line. They write, "For a man who wants to make a profession of good in all regards must come to ruin among so many who are not good."
This raises an important question about the text's foundational premise regarding humanity itself.
Let's hear it.
The entire architecture of this argument rests on that phrase, "among so many who are not good." The author doesn't present this as some cynical complaint about the world. They present it as a statistical reality.
That's just empirical data to them.
Exactly. It is an empirical observation of the effectual truth.
Let me push on that a bit. Say you have a CEO who takes over a struggling, deeply cutthroat company, and they decide, you know what, I am going to lead by absolute transparency, perfect honesty, unwavering ethical goodness.
Okay, setting the stage.
Right. They completely refuse to play the dirty office politics. Does their goodness inherently fail to reform the company?
According to this text, pure goodness in that environment does not act as a cure. It acts as a vulnerability.
Wow, a vulnerability.
Yeah, think about it. If you are playing a high-stakes game where everyone else is hiding cards under the table and you insist on showing your hand out of a commitment to honesty, you don't inspire the cheaters to change their ways.
No, they're just going to take all your chips.
Exactly. You simply allow them to bankrupt you faster. The author is breaking down the raw mathematics of preservation here.
The mathematics of preservation, I like that.
If you restrict yourself to only using good methods, while your competitors are actively willing to use deceit, manipulation, and force, you are fighting with one hand tied behind your back against an opponent who has a knife.
That's a terrifying image, but true.
And in that scenario, your ruin is mathematically assured.
That drastically changes how we define a failed leader, doesn't it? I mean, in our traditional imagined framework, if a leader is deposed because they refuse to compromise their morals, we tend to view them as this tragic, noble figure.
You build statues of them.
Right. They were a martyr for goodness. We praise them.
But under the lens of the effectual truth, that martyr is actually a catastrophic failure.
Because they failed their primary job.
Yes, they failed in their singular primary duty, preservation. The text doesn't care about your moral purity if the result is that your company goes under, your employees lose their livelihoods, or, in the context of a prince, your citizens are slaughtered by an invading army.
So it's almost selfish to cling to your own moral purity.
That's exactly how the text views it. By clinging to the imagination of how people should be, rather than dealing with the reality of how they are, the strictly good leader commits an act of strategic incompetence. And that incompetence destroys the very entity they were supposed to protect.
So, if pure goodness leads to certain ruin, what is the logical alternative? Because I have to be honest, this is where the popular caricature of this text usually takes over.
Oh, the caricature is everywhere.
Right. People assume the author is telling leaders, well, everyone is bad, so you need to just be the most evil, most tyrannical villain of them all. But that's not what the text actually says, is it?
Not at all. And this is where a rigorous, precise reading of the text is absolutely critical. The author does not advocate for mindless cruelty or chaotic villainy.
Good. Because that sounds exhausting.
It's also just as ruinous as naive goodness. Instead, the text provides a highly controlled, incredibly demanding alternative.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The text provides the ultimate pivot. It says, hence it is necessary to a prince, if he wants to maintain himself, to learn to be able not to be good, and to use this and not use it according to necessity.
Let's look closely at that wording.
Yeah, learn to be able not to be good. It doesn't say learn to be evil.
No, it doesn't.
It's framed almost like an acquired skill, like learning a language or learning to code.
Yes. It is the defining characteristic of what we might call moral flexibility. The distinction between being evil and being able not to be good is essentially the difference between a rabid dog and a trained guard dog.
Oh, that's a great distinction.
The author is advising the leader to add a specific, dangerous tool to their toolkit. You don't walk around swinging a hammer at everything you see, but you absolutely must know how to swing it when you encounter a nail.
But I have to push back here because this sounds like a very, very slippery slope. If a leader learns to not be good, doesn't that inherently degrade the entire moral fabric of the society they are trying to preserve?
How so?
Well, if the CEO acts ruthlessly, even if they think it's technically necessary, won't the employees learn that ruthlessness is just the actual company culture now? How does the author reconcile that degradation?
That is the exact paradox the morally flexible leader must wrestle with, and it's why the concept of necessity is the absolute anchor of this entire philosophy.
The text explicitly says to use it and not use it according to necessity.
Exactly. The author understands that constantly being not good will destroy the state from the inside out by breeding resentment and rebellion. Therefore, the application of not good must be incredibly rare, surgically precise, and overwhelmingly justified by the survival of the state.
It's a complete transition from obedience to calculation.
Yes.
Because if I follow a strict moral code, my choices are largely made for me, right? I will never lie, no matter what. The rule does all the thinking. But if I adopt this author's philosophy, the rule book is gone. I am burdened with constant, relentless calculation.
What's fascinating here is the immense psychological weight this places on the leader. The traditional view assumes that being a pragmatist is kind of the easy way out.
Like taking shortcuts.
Right. But the text suggests the exact opposite. The leader is not relieved of moral weight. The weight simply shifts into a terrifying real-time calculus.
Wow.
Every single day, the leader must look at the landscape and ask, does the effectual truth of this moment demand that I deploy the tool of being not good, or does my preservation require me to be good right now?
Let's extrapolate this to a modern high-stakes scenario.
Okay.
Imagine a CEO of a massive manufacturing company. Okay. The company's facing imminent bankruptcy. If the company goes under, 10,000 people lose their jobs, their pensions, their ability to feed their families. The good thing, the compassionate thing, is to keep all domestic factories open and just try to weather the storm.
Right, the morally comfortable choice.
But the CEO calculates that the absolute necessity of survival requires offshoring half the jobs to a cheaper labor market.
That is the perfect modern manifestation of the text. Firing 5,000 people is a not good action. It causes real, immediate harm.
Terrible harm, yeah.
But if the CEO refuses to be able not to be good, the company dies entirely and 10,000 people suffer. The CEO must deploy the not good action according to the necessity of preserving the larger entity.
And if they miscalculate, like what if they offshore the jobs when it wasn't strictly necessary just to boost a quarterly profit margin?
Then they aren't acting out of necessity, they're just acting out of greed.
Which, according to the mechanics of this text, would eventually lead to their ruin anyway, wouldn't it? Because they would lose the loyalty of their workforce and the trust of their consumers.
Precisely. The masterstroke of this philosophy is that it demands hypervigilance. The leader must become a savant of situational awareness, constantly balancing the immediate harm of a not good action against the existential threat of total ruin.
It sounds exhausting, honestly.
It is incredibly exhausting. It's a very lonely place to be.
So we have established this incredibly complex, intensely private toolkit. The leader is isolated, making these brutal calculations about necessity and moral flexibility. But, and this is a big, but no leader exists in a vacuum.
No, they don't.
And the text recognizes this immediately.
Yeah.
After establishing the private philosophy of the prince, the text shifts abruptly to the public reality. How does this morally flexible leader operate in a society that is constantly watching, judging, and labeling them?
They step into the arena of public perception, which the author treats as a tangible, physical battlefield.
The text transitions by saying, Thus, leaving out what is imagined about a prince and discussing what is true, I say that all men, whenever one speaks of them, and especially princes, since they are placed higher, are noted for some of the qualities that bring them either blame or praise.
That shift is so sudden, isn't it?
It really is. We go from this deep, abstract philosophy about the nature of goodness directly into the gritty, modern-sounding practicalities of public relations.
The author is grounding us back in the effectual truth. In the real world, the internal purity of your calculations, no matter how necessary they were, doesn't matter at all if the public perceives you as a monster.
Perception becomes reality.
Yes, what people think of you is a measurable physical force that can either protect your throne or incite a riot.
I want to focus on that phrase, since they are placed higher. It acts almost like a magnifying glass, you know?
How so?
Well, when you are a private citizen, your personal flaws, like maybe you are a bit stingy or you have a quick temper, they might be ignored or tolerated by your small circle of friends. But when you are placed higher, when you are a CEO, a politician, or a prince, every single action is scrutinized. It's amplified and broadcast to everyone.
It's the burden of the platform.
Right. So does this mean the prince's actual internal morality matters less than how their actions are categorized by the public?
Within the framework of the effectual truth, absolutely. Reputation is not a matter of personal vanity. It is hard currency.
Hard currency.
It is a strategic asset that must be cultivated, managed, and defended just as fiercely as a nation's borders. If the public assigns you qualities that bring praise, you generate loyalty and stability. If they assign you qualities that bring blame, you generate friction and instability.
So the leader is essentially managing a portfolio of public labels.
Yes, and the public is inherently reductive. They won't understand the complex, agonizing calculations of necessity the leader performs in private.
They just see the action.
Exactly. They will simplify those actions into binary categories. He is generous or he is greedy, he is merciful or he is cruel. The morally flexible leader must anticipate these labels and reverse engineer their actions to ensure the balance of public perception falls in their favor.
Even while they are privately doing what is not good.
Especially then.
Which brings us to the final and frankly the most unexpected part of this excerpt. The author starts giving extremely specific, localized examples to illustrate this taxonomy of public perception.
Right, they get very granular here.
Very granular. And they focus obsessively on resource management. They list these opposing qualities. Someone is considered liberal, someone mean, someone is a giver, someone rapacious, someone cruel, and then the text kind of cuts off. But right before it does, the author dives into this highly specific linguistic aside about the Tuscan dialect.
It is a brilliant micro-level application of the macro-level philosophy we've been discussing.
Let me read it exactly because it's so specific. Yeah. Someone mean, using a Tuscan term, because avaro, or avaricious in our language, is still one who desires to have something. By rapine, misero, or mean, we call one who refrains too much from using what is his.
Such a specific tangent.
Right. So what does this all mean? Why does the author, right after making massive, paradigm-shattering claims about the nature of goodness and the necessity of vice, suddenly hit the brakes to give us a semantic breakdown of regional Italian vocabulary regarding who is a cheapskate?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it is the perfect illustration of how the effectual truth governs the most volatile aspect of any society. It's economics.
Follow the money.
Always follow the money. How a leader handles the wealth of their subjects, taxes, spending, confiscation, often determines their survival far more rapidly than their foreign policy or their personal charisma. The author is making a vital distinction between two very different types of not good behavior.
Let's break down the two terms then. You have avaro, which the author defines as one who desires to have something by rapine. Now, rapine means active theft, right?
Right. Plunder, forcibly taking property or wealth that belongs to others.
Okay. Then you have misero, which means one who simply refrains too much from using what is his own. So basically, a miser, a cheapskate.
Exactly. Now, in an imagined republic, a leader would be perfectly generous and perfectly fair. They would never be a cheapskate, and they would certainly never be a thief.
Everyone gets what they want.
Right. But in the effectual truth, a leader cannot afford to be perfectly generous. If they were, they would deplete the treasury and ruin the state. Therefore, the leader must choose to adopt a vice regarding money.
And here's where the mechanism of human psychology really kicks in. Why does the public tolerate one vice and punish the other?
What's fascinating here is that the author intuitively understands the concept of loss aversion centuries before modern psychology even named it.
Oh, loss aversion. Like how we hate losing $10 more than we like finding $10.
Exactly. Loss aversion dictates that human beings feel the pain of losing something vastly more intensely than the pleasure of gaining something.
So, if a leader is misero, if they are a cheapskate, hoarding the state's wealth, refusing to throw lavish festivals or build grand monuments, the public will definitely grumble. They will label the leader as mean. It brings a certain amount of blame.
But it is a survivable blame, because by being a cheapskate, the leader is only hoarding their own resources. They aren't actively crossing the threshold into the citizens' homes and taking their property.
Right. The citizens might be annoyed, but their fundamental livelihoods aren't threatened.
And crucially, by hoarding that wealth, the leader ensures the state actually has the resources to defend itself in a war without having to suddenly levy crushing emergency taxes later on.
But if the leader crosses that line into being avaro,
If the leader becomes rapacious, if they start seizing property, raising exorbitant unfair taxes, or straight up stealing from their subjects to fund their endeavors, they trigger the explosive survival instinct of the populace.
they trigger a revolution.
Yes. The effectual truth is that people will tolerate a stingy leader who leaves them alone, but they will violently overthrow a leader who steals their livelihood.
This proves that the application of learning to not be good requires absolute surgical precision. It's not a blanket permission slip to just be bad when you need to.
No, it's a directive to be precisely the right kind of bad in the exact right dosage to avoid triggering your own destruction.
Wow. Being categorized as mean or misero might be the exact calculation of necessity required to avoid the fatal reputation of being rapacious or avaro.
It shows that the morally flexible leader must be a master of resource management, a master of behavioral psychology, and even a master linguist who understands exactly how their actions will be translated into the local dialect of their subjects.
It brings the lofty, terrifying philosophy of moral flexibility right down into the dirt of everyday governance. You can philosophize about the nature of good and evil all day, but if you tax the wrong merchant at the wrong time, your philosophy won't save you from a riot.
Which is exactly where the author wants us. Out of the clouds of the imagined republics, and firmly planted in the dirt, dealing with the mechanics of things exactly as they are.
Let's pull all these threads together and synthesize what we've uncovered in this deep dive. We started with the author's bold, unapologetic departure from centuries of moralistic tradition, justified entirely by the pursuit of practical utility.
Right. We watch them dismantle the comforting illusion of imagined republics, replacing it with the harsh, outcome-driven metric of the effectual truth.
We examine the stark mathematics of ruin, the realization that insisting on pure goodness in a world populated by self-interested actors is not a moral victory, but an act of strategic self-destruction.
And we explored the revolutionary concept of moral flexibility, acquiring the specific skill to be able not to be good and deploying it strictly according to the brutal calculus of necessity.
And finally, we saw how this private pragmatic philosophy must be meticulously managed in the public eye, where reputations for highly specific vices like being a cheapskate versus being a thief are the actual currency of survival.
It really is an absolute masterclass in navigating power dynamics.
It is. But before we wrap up, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to mull over as you step back into your own complex environments. We've talked extensively about the author's ultimate rule, that a leader must use not good behavior strictly according to necessity.
Right.
It sounds logical. It sounds like a rational, almost scientific formula for survival. But here is the terrifying loophole embedded in that entire framework. Who exactly defines what constitutes a necessity?
That is the million-dollar question.
Because if the prince or the CEO or the politician or the manager is the only one holding the calculator, the only one who gets to decide when a situation is dire enough to justify breaking the moral code, doesn't every single bad action suddenly become perfectly justifiable in their own mind?
It's a dangerous feedback loop.
It's exactly. If a leader convinces themselves that their personal survival is synonymous with the survival of the state or the company, then what limits are actually left? We started this conversation by talking about the cognitive dissonance of following rules that lead to your downfall. But perhaps the most dangerous, unstable reality of all is a worldview where the person in power gets to write and break their own rules whenever they alone deem it necessary. Until next time, keep diving deep.